You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got some breaking news in Trump's criminal case down in Florida regarding his illegal retention of classified documents. One of his former employees, who's referred to in the indictment as Trump Employee 5, he is now speaking out and has broken from Trump's legal team. So, first off, what's the significance of this?
You know, it looks like this character, Brian Butler, who has been in Donald Trump's orbit for literally decades, 20 years now, and seems to be very closely associated with all three of the people who are indicted in the Florida case. That would be Donald Trump, Walt Nauta, and Carlos de Oliveira. In fact, he was best friends with Carlos de Oliveira, which I think will become important when and if Brian Butler is called as a witness at the Florida trial. But, you know, one of the things that we've learned from this brand new CNN reporting is Brian Butler has been cooperating with federal authorities for a very long time. There's reference to multiple interviews with the feds. I believe he testified before the grand jury, perhaps multiple times. And the reporting makes clear that Brian Butler is somebody who was never willing to take an attorney from Trump world to represent him. In other words, to hold him close the way Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira have been held close, right? So it looks like he has been providing information for a very long time that sounds really damning of Donald Trump and the other two co-conspirators. So some of the most, I think, interesting and potentially damaging information that we're learning is that I believe it was on June 2nd, 2020, at the same time, Donald Trump was flying to Washington, D.C., together with his lawyers to meet with federal prosecutors. Brian Butler has revealed that he was helping load box after box after box of what he now believes to be classified documents onto Trump's plane that could be taken to New Jersey, to his golf club in Bedminster. So, Brian, we've kind of known all along that there were potentially classified documents that were taken from Mar-a-Lago and transferred up to New Jersey, to Bedminster. But this sort of confirms that, and the timing couldn't be more nefarious. Right when Donald Trump and his lawyers are meeting with federal prosecutors, presumably trying to talk them out of indicting Donald Trump for the classified documents and obstruction of justice crimes, he's whisking away. I believe
He's literally obstructing justice.
Yeah, right. At the same time, he's multitasking, is what he's doing. And the reporting, according to Brian Butler, is that there were some like 10 or 15 boxes, the white bankers boxes that we've heard so much about, where Donald Trump is ferreting them away to New Jersey. And here's the thing, Brian, remember, it was 3 months later, August of 2022, that the FBI got that search warrant and got buku boxes, lots and lots of boxes with classified documents that Donald Trump had refused to give over previously. So now I think we have a pretty concrete picture here. Donald Trump took 10, 15 boxes from Mar-a-Lago to New Jersey, to his golf club, long before the FBI got that warrant and collected up as much of the classified material Donald Trump still had down at Mar-a-Lago. So my question has always been, and this has been a curiosity to me, why in the world was there never a search warrant conducted at Bedminster in New Jersey for what we now know were additional classified documents that Donald Trump was playing hide and seek with?
Glenn, people are going to see this, and the first word that's going to come to mind here is a flip. Is it possible that we're seeing a flip here?
You know, I don't know that I would call this a flip. And here's why. Flip is kind of a term of art. What does it mean? It means that somebody who's got some criminal exposure, right? Maybe a co-conspirator who was in on Donald Trump's conspiracy to unlawfully retain these classified documents. Somebody with criminal exposure has decided to basically cut their losses. They've decided to take responsibility for their own crimes and flip against the others. Ordinarily, what happens is that person will plead guilty. That person will enter into a formal cooperation agreement that requires them to testify truthfully in the grand jury and at trial involving anybody else, you know, that they have information about, anybody else they know has committed crimes. That's what what a flip is. That's what, when somebody becomes a cooperating witness. This doesn't feel like that. The reason I say that is because Brian Butler made clear in this extensive interview he gave to CNN that he didn't know what was in the boxes in June of 2022 when he was asked to just help load them onto Trump's plane. He said now he knows, but most importantly, he said he's had his own counsel all along. He wouldn't get an attorney from Trump world. So presumably he's been getting good advice all along. And that's probably why he has been cooperating with the authorities all along. There's no indication in the reporting that he had criminal exposure, and flipped, the indication in the reporting, though it's not completely spelled out, is that he's been cooperating from day one, presumably because in part he didn't have any criminal exposure. And it's interesting because Brian Butler now says, I wanted to come forward. I wanted to make my story public. He was referred to as Attorney 5 in the Trump indictment down in Florida, because people are saying this is a witch hunt, and it's not. And I wanted people to have accurate information about how the crimes that are charged against Donald Trump in that Florida federal indictment are based on evidence. And I know about some of that evidence because I lived it and I experienced it.
Okay, so I guess that raises the question, what kind of damage can he do to Trump?
Sounds like he can do a lot of damage to Trump and damage to the other co-defendants, De Oliveira and Nauta. So the article reports that he and De Oliveira were best friends, and it becomes clear as you're reading the reporting that Brian Butler knew and was communicating with De Oliveira about the fact that things weren't right. There were discussions about how they wanted to delete surveillance tapes, but at one point somebody tried to placate Brian Butler and said, "Oh, but we'll keep recording somewhere else, but we're going to delete the recordings of this now." I mean, the sense that you get there is they're just trying to desperately cover their tracks, and there really is no sort of cohesive plan that they have. It's just that they're trying to do away with all of the evidence that they can before all of this comes home to roost, and it falls into the hands of the federal law enforcement agents. So it really feels like Brian Butler can do a whole bunch of damage, not only to Trump, but to De Oliveira and Walt Nauta. And those are the three co-defendants who are presently charged in the Florida case.
Glenn, what's the significance of the fact that Butler retained his own counsel and didn't kind of glom on to the existing Trump orbit legal team?
Yeah, we have seen this movie before, haven't we? When witnesses or people who might even be complicit in the crimes of Donald Trump originally are represented by Trump world attorneys. And what do they do? Well, they lie, they cover up, they conceal, they hold everything close. It's much like a mafia organization where you don't flip on the boss and we're going to get you a lawyer to make sure you remain loyal. The person that comes to mind when I first read this reporting is Cassidy Hutchinson. If you'll recall, and that was one of Mark Meadows' close assistants and aides, she at first was provided a Trump lawyer, and she started to lie. She kind of fell in line. She wasn't telling the January 6th House Select Committee the full truth as she knew it about Trump, Meadows, and others. She finally got an unconflicted lawyer, somebody who was looking out for her legal interests, not Trump's legal interests. And she began to tell the truth. She has become something of a hero now because she has laid bare some of what was going on in the White House, including Trump, Meadows, and others on and around January 6th. Here we have Brian Butler, who said, you know what? I don't want to be represented by a Trump world lawyer. I'm going to get my own independent conflict-free counsel. And that is probably why he's been cooperating with federal law enforcement authorities all along. You may remember there was also reporting about somebody else in Trump world, somebody else who worked at Mar-a-Lago, who originally went into the grand jury and lied to try to cover up some of Donald Trump's crimes. He had a Trump world lawyer at the time. And then there was a battle fought by Jack Smith trying to get that individual conflict-free counsel. The chief judge in D.C. ordered that he was entitled to conflict-free counsel. And once he got that conflict-free counsel, he said, I want to retract my false testimony that I gave before the grand jury, and I want to go in and testify truthfully about what I know, concerning Trump and company and their crimes. So listen, the Sixth Amendment right to counsel is so important, Brian, but it is a Sixth Amendment right to conflict-free counsel, somebody who has the client's interest at heart, not the mob boss's interest at heart.
Well, look, I know that Brian Butler is not an indicted co-conspirator in all of this, but he still was a witness to these crimes. So does the fact that he's coming forward and openly cooperating with prosecutors, does that make it more likely that we'll see other witnesses cooperate against Trump, whether indicted or not?
Usually there's strength in numbers. And when people, start to break from the criminal organization or the criminal conspiracy that is formally indicted, with Trump, Nauta, and De Oliveira being co-conspirators, it often emboldens more people to come forward with the truth. There's safety in numbers. One of the first things I thought of when I saw that Brian Butler decided to go public with evidence that would incriminate Trump and others is I hope he has a security plan in place, because we all know what we will likely see from Donald Trump and how, he will try to inspire his followers, his supporters, to perhaps get after his perceived enemies. We've seen that movie before as well. So, but yeah, to answer your question, often when one person comes forward and breaks from the pack and begins telling the truth about what was going on inside a criminal conspiracy, it does often embolden others to want to, do the same thing, to want to get out there, to want their story told, so they can be on the right side of history. And importantly, Brian Butler said, one of the reasons I came forward was to counter the nonsensical witch hunt claim that Donald Trump keeps spewing into the public square.
Glenn, zooming out a little bit here, what's the status of the Florida trial, and when will we actually know what the trial date might be?
Yeah, great question. There's still a bunch of litigation underway. The last time the case was up in court about a week ago, the parties proposed trial dates. Jack Smith said, how about July 8th? Donald Trump's lawyers, when push came to shove, said, how about August 12th? And for some reason, Judge Cannon at the time said, well, I don't know that these are realistic dates. I'm not sure why that is, particularly when the parties were so close in the proposed trial dates, just virtually a month apart. And what did Judge Cannon do? She set no trial date. So right now, we are all flying blind. We don't know when Judge Cannon will issue a trial date, set a trial date. We don't know when that trial date will be, before or after the November presidential election. We do know that Judge Cannon has been receiving amicus briefs. Troublingly, she's been receiving a number of amicus briefs from some sort of Trump allied forces who are providing briefs on, how it might be the right thing to do under existing law to just dismiss the indictment against Donald Trump entirely. I don't happen to agree with that proposition, but there have been some ominous signs. Now, listen, judges are allowed, they're entitled, they're authorized under the law to take these sort of helpful briefs from other parties. Ordinarily, judges will try to be even-handed about it, maybe take one or two that are arguing in favor of dismissing a case and one or two in favor of no. There is no reason to dismiss the case, and here is why, based on the existing case law, the precedent. So there have been some ominous signs, but with Judge Cannon, I don't think we have ever been able to sit back comfortably and believe she was doing the right thing in the Trump case for the right reason.
And let's finish off with this. If we do get some type of decision, I know that the Trump team is kind of throwing all the spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks right now. And among that spaghetti is this desperate attempt to actually have this entire classified documents case thrown out, basically. If Judge Cannon were to take the extraordinary step of accepting that request by the Trump team, would Jack Smith then have grounds to like what would his recourse be so that this trial doesn't just fall by the wayside?
Yeah, Brian, I rarely do you hear me say, I hope a judge dismisses an indictment, dismisses a criminal case. That's sort of not in my DNA as a former career prosecutor. But I have to say, if Judge Cannon decided to dismiss this case outright, and I do not believe there would be a legal basis for it, that would give Jack Smith the perfect opportunity to do two things. First and foremost, appeal the dismissal up to the 11th Circuit. And I have a feeling, we would have to see why Judge Cannon decided to dismiss the case, but I can see no lawful basis to dismiss. So that would give the 11th Circuit the opportunity to reverse her, reinstate the case. And the other thing that would do is, I have to believe, that would push special counsel Jack Smith over the line to filing a motion to recuse, to have Judge Cannon removed from the case because her impartiality can reasonably be questioned. That's the language of the federal statute that requires a judge to remove himself or herself from a case if their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. So,
well, wouldn't it be moot by that point anyway, if she's already ruled on it, and then doesn't it just go into the appeals process, and then isn't the trial court finished with it at that point?
So if she grants a motion to dismiss the case outright, yeah, the case at that moment is over. But Jack Smith, I'm sure, would immediately appeal it. It would go up to the 11th Circuit. What I think Jack Smith would do is he would file an appeal of Judge Cannon's motion dismissing the case, and then he would say, and in the event the 11th Circuit agrees with the prosecution, rejects Judge Cannon's ruling dismissing the case, reinstates the case, we are also asking that you, 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, order her removed from the case because she has shown that she's just not impartial.
Okay, so it would go back to the trial court just under a different judge.
It would if the appellate court, one, reversed Judge Cannon, reinstated the case, and two, directed that it be remanded to the trial court for a trial and that a new judge replace Judge Cannon. All of this is within the realm of possibilities.
Okay, and as we've spoken about before, that new judge would just pick up exactly where Judge Cannon left off, so the whole process wouldn't start all over again. The judge would just be read in at the point where Judge Cannon was before she made that hypothetical, ridiculous decision, and it would just go from there. So, to your point, all definitely within the realm of possibility. We'll keep an eye on this case as it continues to progress, and to any more developments that we hear on the Brian Butler front as well. So for those watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.